with Ian Mortimer at the Gloucester History
Hello.
Festival Spring Weekend.
Yes.
You're at Blackfriars Priory, beautiful venue, and you're about to give your talk on, challenging the narrative around the murder, we'll get into this, of Edward II at Berkeley Castle in 1327.
Yeah.
So Ian, first of all, thank you very much for joining me on the British History
Thank you
podcast.
very much for asking me to come along. That's great.
You're very welcome. I'm very, very excited to speak to you. Okay, so let's start with a quick reminder for everybody. What's the story we're usually told about Edward II?
We are told lots of stories usually, but the generally sort of most frequently told one is that Edward II was done to death on the orders of Roger Mortimer on the 21st of September 1327 in Berkeley Castle, and that this was basically a nasty murder. By a few years, there were stories about red hot pokers and things like that. So depends which story. Depends if you're talking to school children. You don't normally talk about red hot pokers if you're talking to school children, but they're in the Chronicles from 1333 onwards. So that's the story people normally get told, that he was murdered on Roger Mortimer's orders by Lord Berkeley and Sir John Maltravers.
Do you know, I always thought the red hot poker thing would be some sort of Victorian invention.
No, it was invented at the time.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting in itself, I suppose. So, okay, what's the truth, though?
The truth is, what I'm challenging, I mean, many years ago I challenged the whole idea that Edward II died in Berkeley Castle. And this went through the academic press some time ago, and people found it very difficult to accept. It challenged so many of their preconceptions. It challenged so many of the records they normally use to write history, and it raised so many profound questions, such as, you know, if this is false, and yet you've got the records of a royal funeral, what else do we have to doubt? So people naturally wanted to resist it. Yeah. And although it was in the academic press, and although it went through well-received books, there was always this question of, is this alternative narrative true? No one could find any fault with my analysis, but no one really wanted to embrace it. And one person said, one academic said, it's because you've so wholly encapsulated that argument, no one's going to gain from it, only so it's up to me to do all the running. But then people started ignoring it, and that annoyed me. And then people started writing really, really bad articles, which trying to defend the orthodox. And I just thought, this is incompetence from paid academics. This is not good. And then one day I was reading something and I had a light bulb moment. And so what I've been doing for the last 8 years now is not challenging the initial story. I challenge the entire way we understand history. So how do you know what you think you know? This has been a big thing for me for the last 8 years, challenging everything we understand about the past, because as things stand, we tend to take a piece of evidence and either accept it or we don't. Everything thus is really opinion. It doesn't matter if you've got lots and lots of documents to say such and such happened, if they all had the same source, it's just your opinion that that source was right. So what I've been really working on is how you can use information science to get to the truth of things. How can you prove things?
And I'm going to imagine you've had quite a bit of pushback then.
Yep.
Quite a lot of difficulty.
Yeah. Academics aren't on the whole very good at historical methodology. There's a really, really good, well, it's an out-of-date book now, but it was written by two French scholars in 1897, Langlois and Senebour. And they start in the preface saying, why do academics not produce more methodological books? Why is it? And they said, it's because they despise them. And the more my experience has gone on, the more I find this is true. People want to know the story, and the academics want to tell them the story. They don't want to go for ages over how do we know what we think we know. They want to go with what they believe. And so ultimately, a lot of history comes down to opinion and belief. And when you get challenged, quite often that brings in prejudice and bias on top of that. Very few, in fact, I don't know of anybody, to be honest, pardon me, who is using information science to prove things of a political nature in the past. You would when you're doing social history, you might be using statistics and large numbers of documents for a social study. But in the political realms, no, I don't know of anybody who's actually doing what I've been doing for the last 8 years.
Interesting. So you've gone down a wormhole.
Well, I qualified originally as an archivist, so I'm actually bringing my original making the archive years I spent working in the archive profession actually pay off at last. I must admit, at the time when I was given my archival education at UCL, I did think, oh, why are we doing this? Why? This is just obvious. Or second, but I'm so grateful for it now because it does mean I understand where information comes from. I have that methodological background, which means I can do things that other historians can't.
So back to Edward. Why? What was the benefit of the narrative that he had died at the time when it
right?
started to...
I mean, Edward II was deposed. Well, he was, to be exact, he was forced to abdicate in January 1327. He was then locked up in Kenilworth Castle, and no one really had thought through what to do with him. And the thing about Edward II is, although he has a bad reputation, he wasn't a bad man. No, he was a poor king, but he was a pious man. He was actually quite a good man, and he had many faithful followers. And they obviously were still interested in him after he was locked up. So after April 1327, when he was transferred to Berkeley, there was Berkeley Castle. There was an attempt to free him from Berkeley Castle, and for a while it was successful. He got as far as Bristol before he was recaptured and taken back to Berkeley Castle. So everybody's scared because they don't know what to do with the next king. Normally you just killed the ex-king, you just killed somebody and got them out of the way. They didn't do that with Edward II. So Lord Berkeley at Berkeley Castle had a problem. What am I going to do? And when he was told by Roger Mortimer there's another plot afoot to rescue Edward II, Lord Berkeley thought, I'm going to fake his death and then move him off somewhere else. So the advantage of announcing the death in 1327 was you'd stop anybody trying to rescue the man. The disadvantage is, okay, now we've locked up a man, contrary to the rules of Magna Carta, indefinitely, and we faked his death. We faked the funeral in Gloucester Abbey, as it was then, of an anointed monarch. That's the bit that Lord Berkeley did not think through, and it created all sorts of problems.
So is Edward's tomb in Gloucester empty?
No, it's full of him. But he's full of him inside an Italian coffin.
Okay.
It's only been opened once in 1855. The shape is a domed shape, which is a shape of coffin you get in Italy, but not in this country. We get flat top ones here. He was probably put in there having been brought back by ship in December 1342, so 15 years after he's supposed to have been buried. He probably died in 1341. Edward III had this massive, great big tournament in the depths of winter in 1341 with all these banners around the tournament area with the motto in English, "It is as it is," like everything is now right. And this is very much Edward III correcting things. He liked to put everything right when something was wrong. And this is a big announcement. I think we could connect. There's lots of circumstantial evidence that can tell you that Edward II was dead by this stage. So the next Parliament, Edward the Black Prince, is given the Principality of Wales. He's made Prince of Wales. He couldn't have had that title beforehand because Edward II never gave it up. So there's things like that. The royal family starts endowing chantries for Edward II's memory in 1342. So there's lots of circumstantial evidence that makes you pretty clear that he's dead by then. The most obvious public event to connect with this is "It is as it is," that tournament. And I don't see any argument that he survived beyond 1341. But there's lots of evidence that he was alive in the 1330s in Italian custody.
Right. So where in Italy? How much do you...
Initially in... it's an Italian letter called the Fieschi letter, states he was at a place near Milazzo, and you can't actually be sure where that was, but the most likely place is it appears in the document as Milasci, and I interpret that as Milazzo. That could be wrong, but it's in the area where the nephew of Cardinal Luca Fieschi, the person who's looking after Edward II in Italy, was able to sort of supervise him. He was then transferred probably in 1333, to a sanctuary near Cecina in northern Italy. So this is about 50 miles north of Genoa, where again he was looked after by Niccolo Malaspina, Il Marchesotto. There's this great sort of Italian warlord who's a nephew of Cardinal Luca Fieschi. Cardinal Luca Fieschi is one of these cardinals who's got fingers and pies in every single country, controls Europe, very powerful man. And he is the person who was looking after Edward II in Italy and was also a kinsman of Edward II and a close friend. They did meet 3 times in England before all this fiasco started. So Cardinal Luca Fieschi is the man. The crucial thing is Cardinal Luca Fieschi is not doing it for Edward II's benefit. He's doing it for the Pope. And Edward III had to give his emissaries letters promising they could borrow £200,000. That's more than 6 times the entire royal income. £200,000 to negotiate with the Pope on the King's secret business overseas, which I interpret as being Edward II in Italy. Over £186,000 of that was actually paid, which is a colossal amount of money. And this is the really important bit, because of course Edward had to change so much. He had to tax people in England. He had to put the whole country pretty much on a war footing, on top of being on a war footing, to pay for this massive debt to the Pope. And he enlisted the support of the Fieschi in doing this, which is extraordinary, because the Fieschi were Genoese, and the Genoese were allied to the French, and we're at war with France. So this is a bit like, I don't know, take a 20th century equivalent, us having the Italians negotiate with the Germans on our behalf. It's extraordinary what was happening in the 1330s. And the Fieschi family are extraordinary bunch, and their part in Edward II's later life is, I think, the most remarkable political story I've ever come across.
So what kind of conditions do you think he would have been kept in?
Looked after well. I mean, he was a pious man. Edward II, Edward III did meet again in Koblenz in Germany in 1338, and he was his expenses were minimal. He was living like a hermit then. He was living in sanctuaries in Italy. So he basically had become a man of the cloth, but not entirely a man of the cloth, because in 1392, so many, many years later, at the court of the King of Navarre, this chap called John de Galles turns up, and he's described as the son of the King of England, and he's described as the brother of the King of England. And you couldn't be a son of the King of England and the brother of the King of England in 1392 unless you're an illegitimate son of Edward II. Now, Edward II happened to use the title William le Galais when he met his Edward III in Koblenz in Germany. So there's a very good chance that John de Galais was his illegitimate son. So when I say he had become a man of the cloth, not entirely.
Not entirely. So, okay. So his body's brought back in 1342,
I think,
probably.
yeah.
How do they sneak it back into Gloucester?
Edward III had thought about that in 1337. It was a building site, because all of the east end of the church was being rebuilt to put in that fantastic perpendicular window. I mean, perpendicular architecture, comes in through Gloucester. Royal masons were working on Gloucester Cathedral at the time. My suspicion is the mason in question was William Ramsay. I can't prove it was him, but he'd worked on perpendicular buildings in London for the royal family beforehand, so it's his style. And I think that the way you smuggled the body in and replaced the fake body in there, because a body had been put in there in an embalmed state beforehand, remove the false one, put the real one back in, the real coffin. I think that's because it was all a building site, and it was under royal masons' control.
Does the fact that his death was fake in 1327 account for why he's buried in Gloucester and wouldn't have been taken back to Westminster?
That's a really good question, and you couldn't really argue that. You couldn't prove that one, but it's a very good chance, because Edward III, or Roger Mortimer rather, who was in charge of the government at the time, would have thought, we're not actually burying the real man. We're not going to go and put a fake personage in the Holy of Holies in Westminster Abbey. That would be wrong. So I do think that is part of it. But I also think the reason that Gloucester got this fantastic rebuild at that time was because, okay, we've got to get him in there, but we're going to make it magnificent when he is there. Edward III was a finisher. He made things complete. It is as it is. And he wanted his father to be buried in splendour. So I do think that, yes, but I can't prove that.
I mean, Gloucester benefited, most definitely.
Gloucester benefited certainly, and it's, Edward III came back and laid costly tributes on the altars at Gloucester in later years. After the 1337, he doesn't come back until after Edward II is definitely in his tomb, but then he comes back several times. Edward III was very unlucky at sea. He always would get tossed about in ships and fear for his life, and frequently he would say, right, I will give presents to every altar if I survive this. And so he came here and put a gold ship on the altar, having been saved at sea on one occasion, and things like that. So he had an ongoing relationship with Gloucester as a result. Yeah.
Wow. So one last question then, because you have got your talk in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about academics being a little bit difficult to turn. What are audiences like? What's the general public's
There is the odd armchair historian who feels he knows it all and wants to argue with me and ask the same question over and over again. On the whole, people in the audience have got very open minds, and they do get the things, the experts might not know everything. They do understand that, and they can normally follow logical arguments when it's laid out for them. This particular argument requires you to rethink the principles of history, but people can do that. It's not, I've tried to condense it. This is an hour-long talk. I think it should be easy to follow. What we'll see, I've never actually put the difficult parts of this talk before an audience before. I've talked about the fake death of Edward II in a traditional sense of how do you interpret pieces of evidence. Today we're looking at how do you prove information, and that's a step up. But when I've talked about it in a less formal way with audiences before, there hasn't been a problem. I did have one High Court judge once saying, "You're wrong." And I said, "Well, how do you say that?" "Because I'm a High Court judge."
Oh, that's a second.
So you do have people who are not going to change their mind because they see questioning and revisionism as being an attack on authority. And they are so wedded to authority, they will not embrace it. But apart from that, most people have open minds, most people can judge, and most people can see that the importance of this isn't actually what happened to Edward II, it's how do we know about anything.
Yeah.
Social media, internet, whatever it is, the lies that you see in politics, how do you know how to test the truth of anything? That's what's really important here. It's not really about Edward II, it's about the truth.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much, Ian.
Been a pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.